Good afternoon. I'd like to welcome everybody to our Wednesdays with Wightman Town Hall session. Before we get started, we're going to wait a minute or so just to let other people, there's some other people entering the program. I want to put this slide up and ask that you use your chat box to note what's been the greatest challenge you have been or have faced during the COVID-19 pandemic. And if you'd share some thoughts with us while we wait a minute for other people to join us. We'll get started in just a minute. Okay, again, I'd like to welcome everybody and thank you for joining us. My name is Carl Baxmeyer. I'm the Planning Department Manager at Wightman, and I'll be the facilitator for today's meeting. This all started with the recognition that these really are unprecedented times and that superintendents and school districts are facing challenges that they've never faced before. We thought that this town hall forum is a great platform for superintendents to learn and share ideas and best practices. And that really was the start of doing this. And we've had, this is our third in a series of town hall meetings. One of the things when we first started this, we had seen a presentation by Heidi Hayes Jacobs. She is a noted author and educator who really coined the 3 phases of the COVID-19 pandemic. She broke it down into triage. That's the immediate actions that we took to deal with the pandemic, sheltering in place, only having essential workers leave their homes. But now as the pandemic curve has begun to flatten, we're moving into the transition phase, beginning to look ahead at the uncertainties associated with starting school. And ultimately, we'll have the post-pandemic. What is the new normal that we're going to be living with as the pandemic eases? To do that, we thought we would really focus on this topic as we prepare to bring teachers and students back. What do we have to consider for social distancing in the classroom and throughout the facility for student safety? Our moderator is Dr. Tom Langdon. He's a part-time superintendent at Walkerville Schools. He's also an educational consultant with Wightman, advising us on academic issues as we do our planning and design. So Tom, I'll let you move into introducing our panelists today.
Okay, thank you, Carl. Today, we're very happy to have 3 outstanding people on our panel to help us understand this issue further. First, we have Mr. Greg Helmer, the Ravenna Public Schools Superintendent. He has a lot of experience as an administrator through the elementary, middle school, and also the high school as an athletic director. So we welcome Greg. Also joining us today will be Dr. Christina Counts, who is the Vice President of Strategy and Development for MiEN, and we're happy to have her expert opinion today as well. And finally on our panel today, we'll have Mr. Kevin Ecarious, who also works as a Vice President at MiEN in the marketing department to help all of us understand better the issue that we're presented with today.
Whether they're sitting on a wobble stool, then maybe they're over at a table collaborating with other peers, or maybe they're on a soft seat, learning via, what's written in a book. So this type of environment that we've been creating on that previous slide, it had the ability to support 36 students in a room, but it was really more about offering enough open spots so there was some flexibility to, again, choose where you want to learn, how you learn best at that moment. So Christina, if you could jump in and maybe talk about how we've adapted, this layout to the COVID response.
Yeah, so we took what would have been our flexible collaborative classroom and started to look at some of the CDC guidelines for social distancing and how we could move that flexible furniture and include that 6-foot radius by using stacking desks that nest together. It was important for us to think too about the surfaces that we're specifying in the space. Are we using a vinyl that is easily cleanable? Do we have antimicrobial laminates on our surfaces? We also were really looking at them being highly mobile because it may not be feasible to still fit the class size of students that's in your enrollment in the space once you incorporate the 6-foot radius. So using a teacher mobile station that can be moved outside to a common area to start to take advantage of some of the flex spaces in your building. So being able to have this furniture on casters and move it to another area that could become instructional space. So one of the things that was important for us too, not only following the guidelines, but also still incorporating those instructional practices that we've been encouraging and starting to implement into our schools. How can we still collaborate? How can we still build those 4 C's of communication and critical thinking? Have projects so that it's not all still teacher sage on the stage, the cemetery effect of rows. What can we do differently? So the first guideline from CDC was that all students are facing forward. So that is the design that you see here. That is the recommendation for the least amount of risk of spreading germs across the space. We also moved in to look at different layouts where we could still keep some collaboration and ability where the students are looking at each other and not just facing the front at the back of someone's head that they're staring at. So by starting to move more like a Socratic seminar layout in the room, which is the one that's on the screen right now. And then being able to even move that again into a more of a collaborative space that mimicked that first design that we saw. So in doing that, we were able to kind of pull small groups together and circle them around. So we're really looking at the products that we could utilize that would meet the need and also the layouts that would address those guidelines.
One of the positives I would see immediately on this is that you might want to keep students in the same classroom. You could actually change teachers, but different teachers have different teaching styles, right? So they could come in and have them go to more of a group setting, possibly within the constraints of the new guidelines. And also maybe go back to more of the Socratic or more of the, even the, you know, sometimes there is a place for the sage on the stage occasionally, and maybe go back to that for an hour, or maybe presentations by students. So this gives us the flexibility to go even during the same day to change things around and to keep it fluid for instructional purposes.
Yeah, you mentioned keeping the students in the room. That is one of the guidelines that was listed by CDC, and bringing lunch in and having music and art come into the classroom. One of the other recommendations with that was the storage of student materials, that they should have their own cubby or their own plastic bin that their materials went into. So in this space, there's a lot of mobile storage with those plastic bins to kind of meet that criteria set forth.
Right, perfect. All right. Well, I guess I'd like to get our superintendent, Greg Helmer, on to maybe make some comments about some of these slides so far that that you've seen. Could you see these incorporated within the educational milieu?
Absolutely. You know, I think it's interesting. And yesterday, our pre-planning meeting, it was enlightening to me to listen to Wightman, who are these architectural design experts, and then now we've got MiEN, who specialize and are experts with furniture. And you know, looking at these particular layouts, obviously, you know, I wish I had $2.5 million right now to the entire district going into this craziness, because the furniture that MiEN's talking about and those classrooms that are on display really help us to be facilitators of learning in the classroom. And that's what we've all been doing in public education. And so I think the ideas that we have about how to move the current furniture we have around are absolutely awesome. I don't like the phrase social distancing, because that goes against everything that we do in public school.
Right.
We want kids to be social. We want classrooms to be interactive. So I like to use the phrase, and I've been using it with our school community and our leaders and our board, is that we're going to practice physical distancing. And so the layouts that Christina and Kevin have in those slides We're already showing those in our district to generate some ideas with our teaching staff going into next year. And so I also wish I had, I think it's called the Elevation 8, the stand to sit table that MiEN has. Can I get like 1,000 of those right now? Because those are out.
Well, okay, so if you send him 1,000 sometime soon, I'm sure that Greg will be very happy about that. Just well, so Christina, elaborating on what you've shown so far, as far as your brief presentation there, obviously MiEN has been doing some things in the past that allowed you guys to even evolve more quickly at this time. What more, you know, going into the future, what else do you see going on that can really help and make sure that students are kept safe? And even if there's not a current crisis going on, we want to keep them safe from other, you know, viruses and those kind of things. This might just be something that's going to continue as, again, the new normal, if you want to use that term, into the future. So these things are going to have applicability no matter whether we're going to be right in the middle of a crisis or not, right?
Right. One of the, you know, the images that we saw there was really focused on the classroom and how can we bring students back and practice that physical distancing in the classroom. But a lot of conversation still needs to also circle around our teachers and faculty. What are we doing to promote their safety and wellness also throughout the building? And through those CDC guidelines, when we talked about the common spaces, the cafeteria was a big one that came up a lot in how we can take that area and begin to think of strategies that can promote that safe and wellness. And whether that was staggering the schedule additionally or having student pick up their own boxed lunch. So there were a lot of discussions around thinking about what that looks like for the cafeteria too.
Right, right. And so Kevin, as you present this to superintendents and they ask you the questions, some questions such as, you know, what about cafeterias and how can we make things work and mesh together? What would be the standard idea as far as if there's a general thought about this? I know yesterday, as we talked about this in the pre-meeting, you discussed things like maybe not having students leave the classroom. We talked about that. We also talked about you know, having teachers stay in the same classroom. But, you know, there's other issues out there too, like a hallway movement and perhaps having dividers right on the desks themselves, plastic dividers. What do you see as far as that goes going into the future?
Yeah, let me tackle the first part of the question and see if, with Christina's experience working on several different committees, if she can answer that last part. But I think the first part, when you think about like the cafeteria, the media center, you know, commons areas, or even the hallway as an instructional space, it's really about squeezing the time in which you can have that be a place of learning from, you know, perhaps before school starts till well after school ends. We see the cafeteria as being kind of a spot where, you know, it's really only in use for a few hours of the day. So how could it be more inviting to support education in that spot, to free up some of the student space that we need for that physical distancing in the classroom? So, I mean, definitely, you know, good questions. And I think it really boils down to how do we maximize the benefit of the whole educational space, you know, inside and potentially even outside of the walls here as we are in the warmer months.
Great point about the cafeteria. It is an underutilized space, that's for sure. So let's go back to Greg then and just say, you know, Greg, what do you think of the biggest challenges are as far as, do you think it's in the lower level, the upper level classrooms? I know there's probably both and, right? There's going to be a lot of challenges throughout the districts.
It's a significant challenge. Number one, just student management wise, and then alone getting into the furniture with the physical distancing. I like Kevin's idea about opening the horizon on utilizing hallway spaces, and we do that. I mean, if you walk into schools, you will see hallways being used, but I don't think it's ever been done with intentionality that we'll need to do this coming fall. I sort of look at it like some of these big cities are looking at potentially closing down some of the roadways so then they can move furniture out into the streets for cafes and dining experiences. And so it's kind of like the hallways being our roadways, right? During instructional time, we're going to have to move the students and some furniture out into those hallways. So flexible, adaptable type of furniture is going to be a key.
Correct, correct. Well, we've kind of spent our first part of the meeting, Carl. I mean, we're almost to the 15-minute mark here, and I wondered if you might want to consider going into the breakout rooms at this point, or do we want to continue the discussion going a little bit? We're 15 minutes in.
Good point, Tom. Why don't we move into the breakout rooms? Christine is going to send us into the breakout rooms, and we'd like you to discuss the opportunities and challenges associated with implementing physical distancing, as was pointed out. I'm just unmuting everybody so that they can participate. So in these breakout rooms, we're hoping that the participants have the opportunity to address the question put forth, but also to share your thoughts, experiences, best practices about what you're doing to implement the physical distancing in the classroom and school buildings. Who wants to start? Brian, you were the first one in the room.
Yeah, super. So yeah, my name is Brian Shark. I'm on the technology side of the business these days. I have worked very closely with Kevin and Christina in the past, and I was really, kind of spying on them, but I'm more than happy to participate. One of the biggest things that I could see from that layout was the space, the size of the space, right? I mean, I don't know if that was a media center, right, or a multi-purpose area, right? But a typical classroom, I don't know that is that large, right? So the size of the actual classroom, I think, is going to be definitely a challenge for all school districts across the country. And I know that our school district, I live in northern Michigan, and our school district is looking to more of a hybrid approach, as we start the school year. And again, me being on the technology side of the business now, we are, involved with a lot of tech directors or technology individuals, and so they're at the front ends of having to be prepared for this. So, the hybrid approach might allow that. If you take 50% of the students on Monday and the other 50% Monday, Wednesday, Friday, and then Tuesday, Thursday for the other 50, you may be able to do something like that.
I think even with the blended learning approach, it's a good time where we are trying to build that ownership and build student agency in learners. And so this is a good opportunity to be able to expand on that and build that transparency and ownership in the classroom with some of the independent learning using digital curriculum with technology.
I should have asked those of us in the room to identify ourselves before we started. Again, I'm Carl Baxmeyer with one of the educational planners at Wightman. Casey?
I'm Casey Rideau. I am an interior designer with Wightman.
Jim Fish, superintendent, North Branch Schools. We're in the bottom of the thumb in Michigan. And
we have one other person who has identified by a phone number. You want to tell us about yourself. Well, what's happening in your district, Superintendent, as you're looking ahead to potentially reopening schools? And
well, I can tell you some things that we've already done. We formed what we call an innovation team in our district. We have we have 4 buildings. We have a K-5 building, so we had 3 teachers from that building. Excuse me, a K-4 building, 3 teachers from that building. A 5-8 building, 3 teachers from that building. And a 9-12 high school, so 3 from that building. We have 4 parents. And then we have our principals and curriculum director on this committee. And so our actual first meeting, we've done a lot of legwork for the meeting, but our first meeting is tomorrow at 8 a.m. And we've identified 4 main topics in order to come back 100% in-person instruction. So before I share those topics, we went ahead and had a town hall meeting with our community. And usually if we have we have a meeting and it's face-to-face, you get 10 to 12 people. We had 357 families join the town hall meeting. So it went very well. And overwhelmingly, they want in-person instruction. So that is where we are looking to go. So we looked at 4 different models. One would be in-person instruction with safety precautions. One would be in-person instruction with social distancing. Another one would be, and then we'll provide them an option also for those families that want virtual or distance learning. We'll provide that option as well. And then another model is 100% virtual instruction if we're mandated to close. So we're building 4 plans. Now with the one that the community wants, we're anticipating in-person social distancing. So that's the one. I mean, if it's in-person safety procedures, we can pretty much handle that one because that's what we normally do. But with the social distancing, so we looked at 4 key, not getting into details yet. That'll happen with our innovation team, but 4 things that have to happen before we get into the details. One is we need space. So we have looked at every single part, every nook and cranny in our buildings. We have a church that used to be a school. We can utilize that. So we looked at everything, and we have the space. So that is a hurdle that you know, that's a big one. If you don't have space, it doesn't matter. Right now, we're concentrating then on teachers, because even if you have space, you have smaller classes. So then we're trying to figure out, okay, how do we do that with the same amount of teachers? Because, you know, like every other school district in the country, we're going to get a significant cut in our funding. So it's not like we can just go hire 12 teachers. So some of the things that we're doing, we looked at our bigger classrooms and team teaching. I'm having somebody out Tuesday. There are some buildings, as we move into a team teaching concept, we've been doing that with a lot of our classes, but more of our teachers want to do it. So we're potentially looking at knocking out some walls. And preliminary figures are to be about $4,000 to $5,000 to knock out a wall. And we've identified, I believe, 4 to 6 classrooms. So that would be maybe $24,000, but one teacher is $60,000. So we looked at how we could do that. Then, like I just joined late, but we're looking at cafeterias, auditoriums. We're looking at those things as well. So we think we can manage that. And then in our state, we're hoping for relaxation of certification requirements for teachers. If we get that, we'll be fine. And then the third thing that we're looking at is time, because there's going to be busing issues and so forth. For example, our kindergartners, our BK kindergartners will be going out to that church I mentioned. We would need to release them earlier every day in order to get back here for busing to go home with our regular busing. So we're looking for some seat time waivers. And then the 4th thing is resources. So those are our 4. If we have those 4 things, we can make it work. And we're fortunate that we're in a good situation financially, that I think we have the resources as well. Now it all depends on how much we get cut. So that's what we're doing in our district right now. That's where we're spending our time.
Thank you for sharing. That was really, sounds like you're really zeroing in and moving ahead. How is the staff, the faculty reacting to this?
So part of what we will do, our specials teachers, we probably, and again, we surveyed all of our parents, and they're saying, you know, while we value the arts and we value physical education and so forth, we really want the core subjects taught. I mean, that's where we really need the help. So we'll probably utilize our specials teachers if we get the certification, relaxation. In the elementary, we can do it anyway. But I'm talking in our 512. So our teachers are aware of it. We've had, I think, 4 all staff meetings, and then I have another one tomorrow at 6 p.m., a Zoom meeting, virtual meeting. And we just share the plan with them and say, look, here's our options. And just what I shared with you, while we do not want to go to option B, which is in-person social distancing, we may be required to do that. And so here's how that would look. But a lot of it will come out from that innovation team as well, which helps when you have 12 teachers on there that can then filter that information out ahead of time. So, but so far so good. So far so good. Everybody will have a job, and we emphasize that. We're not in a layoff mode here, so I emphasize every meeting, everybody will have a job. It might look a little bit differently next fall, but you'll have a job.
That's great because it takes a burden off of the people, not having to worry about that. Thinking about some of the things that Christine and Kevin and Greg mentioned for social distancing, thoughts about how you're going to implement that beyond demoing walls to make larger spaces? Are you considering other alternatives to provide those physical barriers between students?
So we did measure our classrooms, so we know how many we can get in the classrooms and so forth. We've started talking about then, as I mentioned, we needed those 4 parameters. If we can meet those 4 parameters, we can move forward. So now we're starting discussions tomorrow on food, how we do our food service. So, but if we can do those other things, we can figure that one out. We'll figure food service out. Busing is probably as big an issue as anything for us. And we're looking at what we do when we go into a convenience store, when you have the plexiglass between seats and so forth. So we're looking at situations like that. I mean, if it can work in a convenience store, it can work on a bus. We're looking at what the airports are doing. The first kids on go all the way to the back, and then you seat them moving forward, and then you dismiss obviously from the front. So we're looking at that type of model. So, with the CDC guidelines that we read about, a maximum of 12 kids on a bus, that won't work. That's impossible. So that's why we're looking at, okay, so we have to configure that bus with safety features on the bus. So we can get 40 to 50 on it. And then if we get some relief with seat time, we may have, right now we have 2 bus runs, we may add a 3rd bus run. And so maybe our BKK kids only go to school from maybe 9 to 2 instead of, whatever, instead of a full day, maybe they have a 5-hour day, so I can pick them up later and send them home earlier, that kind of thing. So, but we need some help from the state with that before we move forward there.
Thinking back to some of our previous sessions, access to technology, to the internet connectivity has been cited by a lot of superintendents as a major problem. Just for your district in particular, if you have to go to the other options of a hybrid or 100% virtual if you're mandated to close, has that been a problem in your district in particular?
Yeah. Oh yeah, we're in a rural area, so we are on a hybrid model right now. I think I joined late and heard, I think Brian was talking about that. We're in a hybrid model, and so we have instructional packets. We started instructional packets really the next week after we were closed. It was that Thursday, and then we started our virtual learning on April 6th. So it's going well. But we don't have 100% virtual learning opportunities. It's just not there.
Well, as you can probably see on your screen, we are closing the breakout rooms and we're going to reconvene together. I'm going to ask each of the people who recorded the discussion during the breakout rooms to give us a brief synopsis and overview of what was shared during the breakout rooms. Greg, do you want to start?
Yes, this is Greg. Can you hear me okay? I know my microphone may have been breaking out earlier.
We can hear you.
We can hear you.
Okay. So some of the points that came up was the point that older buildings may not be big enough to maintain distancing in the room. In particularly, the layouts that were shown might work for a 900 square foot room, may not work for a smaller room. So we had some discussion about leveraging other spaces, other bigger spaces like the cafeteria, gym, media center, and so forth, to use those as classrooms to reduce class sizes or to maintain distancing. We also had a discussion about some parents may not choose to send their children smaller class sizes. And there was a point made that we're really going to need flexibility in working with state and local governments and how we count students. Parents may make different choices in the middle of the year or towards the end of the year if they are more confident to send it. So when they have to do the count for number of students in the building that helps drive funding, that may change over the course of the year significantly, and it's going to be difficult to plan for that. We also had a discussion about technology. We had a discussion about the need for students not to necessarily be in the same room all day. They have a need to move, and whether it's rotating some teachers in for music and art and things like that, but making sure students have the opportunity to move and perhaps have access out of doors, or even having access to other learning spaces like the corridor outside of the classroom being important. Another point was perhaps having COVID-19 days or weeks and having to plan that into the schedule, and having equity in technology and access, both in being able to reach homes without high-speed access or having a one-to-one program. It was mentioned in Battle Creek, they initially had a one Chromebook per, and that really didn't work. They really need to be one-to-one. Those were some of the comments in the first group.
Okay, the second group, there's a lot of the same issues that came up in terms of challenges, but a couple of things that I thought were a little bit unique and different than your group, Greg, was, the issue of transportation. How do you transport the same number of kids, with the same number of buses? So that's an issue. If this COVID-19 reoccurs, will the school district have the ability to just flip a switch and go from, in-person education to remote education? And are we prepared for that? And that's definitely a challenge. One of the other things that came up was that it seems like every day, every week, as we're transitioning from the triage stage, it seems like we keep taking like maybe one step forward and two steps back as it relates to, having to deal with everything is changing. It just continues to change. And, today we're dealing with one issue and the next day we're dealing with another. One of the other challenges that came up was, working with multiple committees, because everyone has their own agenda, and oftentimes they don't blend well, and that's where some of the friction is. How do you deal with multiple age groups? Because dealing with kindergartners, as Tom had mentioned in our session, they don't social distance, or if we're using the physical distancing term, they don't physically distance well. They're huggers. And then that leads to that whole personal touch of education where, how do you get kids to trust you if you can't even get close to them? Some of the opportunities that came up was, how do we reuse other parts of the building, such as corridors? And Greg, you had mentioned that, cafeterias, gymnasiums, you know, the outdoor space. So there's an opportunity there to maybe rethink how that's being utilized and how they may best utilize that for teaching and learning. And then, you know, maybe there's an ability in all of this, and it was labeled as an opportunity, is to recognize how students learn, and maybe this is the opportunity to adapt to that individual learning environment.
Okay, group
Casey?
3, we also touched on a lot of those common things. One of the biggest challenges we talked about was obviously the space and size of the classrooms. Obviously not all schools are the same. So how do we approach that? A couple opportunities that were mentioned was developing innovation teams to prep and prepare for, you know, these types of things that are happening. Having a mix of, hold on one second, buddy. Sorry. Having a mix of staff, parents, principals, superintendents, a wide variety of people to give input. And one of our members who shared said that they actually reached out to the community. And a lot of times when they do that, they only get a few people who actually share. And they had over 300 plus people attend this virtual meeting. And overwhelmingly were supportive of in-person instruction in the fall. So they kind of are approaching that if they're looking at wanting to do in-person instruction in the fall, they need 4 things really. One of them being space, obviously, which is what we've already kind of talked about. How do they address teachers having same size classrooms, but also the same amount of teachers? Looking at other spaces like cafeterias and auditoriums and how they can utilize them. And another thing that they would really need is some relaxation in the certificates for teachers. And then we also touched a little bit on kind of the busing issue, possibly adding, you know, plexiglass between the seats, because obviously it's not really going to be doable if we have to only bus, you know, 12 students at a time. So looking at alternatives on how to get more kids into the buses, but also kind of work with the overall constraints.
Well, interesting ideas. All 3 groups. I think at the end of the day, we're looking at something that is such a fluid thing, but I think that all the groups seem to have the common theme of some of the big things that could be done next year. I mean, the furniture piece, you know, we have some great reps here from MiEN. They've been working, I think, ahead of the curve in the last several years, and now they're ready to help us. And I also know that, you know, with having Greg Helmer, who is one of the innovators as a superintendent in the state, who, you know, is thinking ahead all the time. I think these kind of conversations, as we've said all along, this is our 3rd town hall. These kind of conversations can only help us, can only enrich us, can only make us better practitioners, whether in the private or the public sector. Again, I want to thank our guests today who've come in. I'm going to throw this back to Carl, but I wanted to personally thank our guests. They've been giving us rich conversation, and we appreciate that, and we look forward to more conversations in the future. But Carl, didn't mean to steal your thunder, but I just, you know.
You didn't. You summarized it very well. And also thanks to the participants who took time out of their day to be with us and share your thoughts. Just to remind you, we will be posting the findings in our next newsletter and on our website and YouTube. And our next town hall will be on June 17th at 1 o'clock.
And Carl, you know what? We have about 3 minutes, so could I ask Christina to maybe share a minute of what her final thoughts are about this whole show and what she thinks about going forward? Sorry.
Yeah, I think that the conversations, as you mentioned, are very rich. It's exciting to see us come together and talk about the points of what needs to be in place to make it successful for an in-person return, to hear other ideas so that maybe we can incorporate some of those into our practice. But as you mentioned, it's a moving target. So continuing to have these conversations in the dialogue, I think, makes us stronger and more prepared to be able to execute in the fall.
Absolutely. Kevin, could you add something that you'd like to let us know about before we head out?
I had some audio issues at the end, so I apologize if I cut out now. But yeah, in hearing the questions, it has me looking at how we help with layouts, and maybe there's some things we can tweak to better respond to the current need.
Oh, looks like that just happened again to you, Kevin. So I also wanted to finish with Greg. So maybe you'll have a second after Greg talks about a few things. Greg, could you share with us your thoughts as a superintendent here in Michigan, last minute?
Yeah, well, I appreciate the slide presentation that Wightman has put together with MiEN's expertise on how to utilize our square footage in classrooms. So I'm going to use this presentation with our community forum and our staff forum because it generates some great ideas with the physical distancing in our classrooms.
We hope other superintendents do so as well. That's kind of why we're here, just to help superintendents help their districts and ultimately help their students. So I will definitely finally be quiet, Carl. We got about a minute and a half left, so I will just stop talking.
My watch must be fast because I'm showing that we're right on time. But
oh, okay.
Also, it's a good wrap up, and if anybody has any individual questions, please don't hesitate to contact us. The general Wightman mailbox is shown on the screen at info@gowightman.com. Again, thank you all for participating, and we hope that you'll join us again in 2 weeks. Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.